The cold keeps trying to make a comeback, but it's time to say no to winter. Down the little back roads of the big woods, the green-up is happening, and it's time to harvest ostrich ferns. The horses luxuriate in grazing in verdant meadows made gold by dew and dawn. And even in the deepest woodland shadows, the ice has at last departed from brooks, ponds, and lakes. Hungry speckled trout are rising, beavers are seeking spring forage, and aquatic birds are making a return. But spring has been slow in coming, and for 3 out of 4 days there has been rain and sleet. But at last there's a sunny day, and it's time to get the tractor ready. We've lost several weeks to inclement weather, and we're behind on getting the gardens going for the year. I check the tires and oil, and clear out detritus from the nooks and crannies. Then we fire her up, and off to get to work. It's the first real day of spring at the homestead, and the first order of business is getting the gardens ready. But as Daphne and I made our way out to the barn, we discovered that one of our does has given birth to 2 new kids. I'll let Daphne give them a once-over. Meanwhile, I'll get on to the all-important task of moving manure that we have raked up in the barn out to the compost heap and into the gardens. Apart from getting the winter's firewood, this is the hardest and most tedious job of homestead living. Making dozens of trips back and forth, I'll bulldoze manure directly into the tractor's bucket, and then haul it back to the compost heap or put it in the gardens, depending on how well rotted it is. Depending on the density of the manure, each one of those buckets is 300 to 400 pounds. The chickens love it when I do this job. Removing the manure reveals all kinds of things they can gobble up. There goes the first of about 100 trips I'll make between barn, compost heap, and gardens over the next week, as I transplant some 15 tons of manure to different sites around the homestead. To a farmer, this stuff is gold. Every bucket load is rich organic matter and concentrated nutrients that will be poured into the garden, enriching the soil and feeding microscopic life that will work in concert with our crops to bring up strong, healthy plants that need no pesticides and very little special care to produce rich crops for us. Indeed, the manure of our livestock is the secret behind the fecundity of our gardens, for these little gardens feed Daphne and I through most of the year. Back at the barn, Daphne is shoveling old bedding into the trench for the tractor to pick up on its next run. I'll bring it out to the berry bushes, the rhubarb patch, and the raised gardens for her to distribute as she sees fit. On one of the runs, I noticed the gardens are already starting to push up some useful weeds. It's time to do a little passive gardening. Passive gardening is a term that I use to refer to taking advantage of the weeds and volunteers that often appear around gardens. These are nutritious and tasty crops that, unfortunately, many persons overlook. In this case, we have fresh dandelion heads for tempura, dandelion greens for a salad, and tender young leaves of curly dock to go on burgers we plan to grill this evening, our way of celebrating the beginning of gardening season. Around mid-afternoon, we take a break from compost hauling to tend to the new garden, half of which was devoted to growing sweet corn last year. The old stalks are too tough to properly till up. Normally we would just pile them all and burn them, but it's been too wet to burn many of them. We burn what we can so that we can return those nutrients to the soil, and the rest get forked into the tractor bucket and brought out to the compost pile site to form the basis of a new compost pile. The new kids, less than a day old, are already vigorous and active. It's amazing to think they can run and play so quickly. With the corn stalks taken care of, Daphne gets to weeding around the berry bushes and rhubarb. But many of those weeds are too good to go to waste, and if she comes across curly dock or the tender leaves of young dandelions, she carefully plucks them away and sets them in a pile to become salad tomorrow or the day after. Then she mulches the rhubarb and berry bushes with old hay brought to her from the garden. Over the summer, as it rains, the hay will decay, and any animal waste upon it will be rinsed down into the soil to feed the growing plants. It's nearly sundown now, and I want to take advantage of this rare, clear day to tend to an annual task that needs to be done to the canoe. The wooden thwarts and any exposed wood of the benches is sanded to prevent infection of molds and mildews. The canoe needs to be in tip-top shape. I use it frequently to study wildlife and for foraging such useful plants as cattails and bullhead lilies. As the sun sets, an evening chorus of birds kicks up, and the first hummingbirds of the season visit the cottage, so we set out the feeder as we always do. The woodwork properly sanded, I begin wiping it down with linseed oil. And while I finish this task, Daphne has gone into the cottage to prepare dinner. I take a break from oiling the woodwork to start a fire in the grill, and Will-O-Wisp, my faithful old Australian shepherd, knows he's going to get a burger too, so he's hanging out nearby. As the food cooks, Daphne brings out hors d'oeuvres, one of my favorite, and a treat that can only be had briefly during early spring, dandelion blossom tempura. When the burgers are grilled, we set a table on the sheltered deck and dine quietly, enjoying the multitudinous songs of nearby birds. It's a good day to live in the woods.